The night I had nothing left. Some nights don't feel like an ending. They feel like the floor finally giving out beneath something that had been cracking for years. Mine came on a Sunday night in November, sitting alone on the bathroom floor of my apartment, staring at a banking app that refused to show me any number that didn't make my chest tighten. My name is Hannah. I was 34 years old, and on that particular night, I had exactly $43 to my name, 11 days until rent was due, and a job the next morning that I had started dreading so completely, my body would physically tense up the second my alarm went off. I want to take you back a little, so you understand exactly how I ended up on that floor. 6 years earlier, I had made what felt at the time like a smart and responsible decision. I went back to school for a business degree, certain it would open doors that my previous retail job never could. I took out loans to do it, the kind of loans that feel manageable on paper when a financial aid officer is smiling at you across a desk, and feel like a slow-motion car crash a few years later when the interest has quietly doubled what you originally borrowed. I graduated with real hope, and then I graduated into a job market that had very little patience for hope. It took me 8 months to find any job in my field. When I finally did, it was an entry-level marketing coordinator role at a mid-sized company called Bramwell Consulting, a job that paid barely enough to cover my loan payments, my rent, and almost nothing else. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that for 4 years. Bramwell wasn't just underpaying me. It was, in ways I didn't fully let myself see until much later, actively unhealthy. My manager, a woman named Renata, had built an entire management style around fear. She praised people publicly and tore them down privately, in one-on-one meetings where there were no witnesses and no records, just her voice, cold and precise, telling me I was lucky to have this job, that people were lining up to replace me, that my work was adequate at best. I believed her. That's the part that still, even now, makes something twist in my stomach. I believed a woman who had never once given me a real compliment, over 4 straight years, more than I believed in myself. Every year I asked for a raise. Every year Renata found a reason it wasn't the right time, budget freezes, restructuring. Let's revisit this next quarter. Meanwhile, my loan payments climbed. Interest doesn't pause for budget freezes. My credit card balance, the one I used for the months my paycheck didn't quite stretch far enough, grew a little heavier every single month, like a slow leak I could never quite find the money to patch. By the time I found myself sitting on that bathroom floor with $43 in my account, I owed just over $61,000 combined between my student loans and credit cards. And I was making less, adjusted for how far my dollar actually stretched, than I had made in my very first job out of college. I remember staring at my phone that night, at a stack of unread messages from my mother asking if I was coming home for Thanksgiving, at a calendar reminder for a work presentation the next morning that Renata had already told me, in an email laced with fake politeness. Needs to be perfect, or we'll have a real conversation about your future here. I sat there and asked myself a question I had been avoiding for years, because I was too afraid of the answer. How did I let my life get this small? I didn't have an answer that night. I just had exhaustion and $43 and 11 days until rent, and a job in the morning that felt less like a career and more like a slow, patient kind of drowning. I finally got up off that bathroom floor sometime after midnight, and I did the only thing I had energy left to do. I went to bed, and I told myself, the way I'd told myself 100 times before, that tomorrow I would figure something out. I had absolutely no idea that figuring something out was about to arrive from the last place I could have ever expected. The text that wasn't meant for me. The next morning started exactly the way I expected it to. Renata's conversation happened, and it happened in front of 2 other coworkers, which was new. Usually she saved her cruelty for closed doors. She picked apart a marketing report I'd spent 3 weeks building, calling it lazy, and the kind of work that makes me question if you actually want to be here, while I sat perfectly still, nodding, absorbing it, the way I had trained myself to do for 4 years. I drove home that evening feeling like something inside me had gone quiet in a way it hadn't before. Not sad, exactly, just numb, Like a light had been dimmed so low I'd forgotten what the room looked like at full brightness. Around 8 p.m., sitting on my couch eating cereal for dinner because it was the cheapest thing in my kitchen, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, Diane. Just confirming our call tomorrow at 10 a.m. to go over the investment structure. Let me know if that time still works for you." I stared at it for a moment, confused. My name isn't Diane. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, one of those messages designed to bait a reply. But something about the specific, personal tone of it made me hesitate. It didn't read like spam. It read like someone who had simply typed the wrong number. I texted back, mostly out of politeness. "Hi, I think you might have the wrong number. I'm not Deanne." A reply came back almost instantly. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I must have grabbed the wrong contact. Thank you for letting me know. Hope you have a good night." I remember smiling just slightly at my phone. It was such a small, ordinary moment. A stranger's simple mistake. I set my phone down and finished my cereal, and I genuinely thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. About 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. "This might be a weird question, but you seem friendly. Are you in finance by any chance? I run a small financial coaching practice, and I'm always looking for people to refer to my newsletter." No pressure at all, just figured I'd ask since I already accidentally texted you once tonight. I laughed out loud, alone in my apartment, for what felt like the first time in weeks. I typed back, mostly just enjoying the strange, small connection of it. "Not in finance at all. I'm in marketing, and let's just say my own finances could use some coaching right about now, haha." I hadn't meant it as an invitation for anything. It was just an honest, slightly self-deprecating joke, the kind you make with strangers you'll never actually talk to again. But the reply that came back changed the entire direction of my life, though I had no way of knowing that yet. Honestly, a huge number of my clients start exactly where you just described. If you ever want to talk completely no obligation, no sales pitch, I do a free 20-minute call for people just to look at where their money's actually going. Totally understand if not, just throwing it out there since the universe apparently wanted us to text tonight. I sat with that message for a long time. Every instinct I had, built over years of being cautious with money I didn't have, told me this was probably some kind of scheme. A free call that would turn into a sales pitch, a coach who profited off desperate people like me. But I was also sitting in an apartment with $43 to my name, a $61,000 debt weighing on my chest every single night, and a job that made me feel smaller every single day. And something about the honesty of that wrong number exchanged the fact that this woman hadn't even meant to text me, hadn't been trying to sell me anything from the start, made me feel like maybe, just maybe, this was worth 20 minutes of my time. I typed back before I could talk myself out of it. "You know what, sure, what do I have to lose?" I had absolutely no idea, in that moment, just how much that single decision was about to change. The call that showed me the truth. Her name was Marisol. She called me 2 days later, at exactly the time we'd agreed on, and the first thing I noticed about her voice was how calm it was. Not salesy, not performative, just calm, direct, and most surprising of all, genuinely curious about me, rather than about extracting information she could use to sell me something. "So tell me honestly," she said, about 5 minutes into the call. "What does a normal month look like for you money-wise?" I told her. I told her about the loans, the credit card, the 4 years at a job that paid too little while asking for too much, the raises that never came. I told her, somewhat to my own surprise, about Renata, about the way 4 years of being told I was lucky to have this job had slowly convinced me that I probably was. Marisol listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said something that I've thought about almost every single day since. "Hannah, can I be honest with you? None of what you just described is a personal failure. It's a system, a job that underpays you while telling you you're lucky, a financial structure that makes debt easy to get into and painfully slow to get out of. You didn't fail at this. You got caught in something a lot of smart, hardworking people get caught in." I remember sitting very still, phone pressed to my ear, feeling something in my chest loosen just slightly, a knot I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for years. That said, she continued, there are things within your control, even inside a hard situation. Do you want to actually look at them together? No pressure, just information. I said yes. Over the next 20 minutes, which quietly stretched into almost an hour, because Marisol never once rushed me off the call, she walked me through something no one, not a single person in my entire adult life, had ever sat down and actually explained to me clearly. Not how to magically erase $61,000 of debt overnight. Nothing that dramatic or unrealistic. Just the actual mechanics of interest rates. The real difference between minimum payments and strategic payments. The specific order in which my particular combination of debts should be tackled to save the most money over time. She showed me, using simple math I could follow, that with a few structural changes, nothing miraculous, just smarter, I could realistically be debt-free in just under 4 years instead of the nearly 11 years my current trajectory was quietly heading toward. I want to pause here and tell you something important, because I think it matters for anyone listening who is in a similar situation right now. What changed everything for me wasn't a magic trick. It wasn't a lucky break, or a lottery ticket, or someone swooping in to pay off my debt for me. It was information. Clarity. Someone finally sitting down with me and showing me the actual shape of my situation, instead of leaving me alone in the dark with only my fear to guide me. By the end of that call, Marisol offered me a low-cost coaching package, genuinely low-cost, nothing predatory about it, and for the first time in years, I said yes to spending money on something that wasn't an emergency or an obligation. I said yes to spending money on myself. I hung up the phone that night and sat in my quiet apartment for a long time, feeling something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. The first small victories. The next few months were not glamorous. I want to be honest about that, because I think too many stories skip over the unglamorous middle in favor of a dramatic before and after, and that skips the part that actually matters most. I sat down with Marisol every 2 weeks. We restructured my debt payments using something called an avalanche method, paying down the highest interest debt first, while making minimum payments on everything else, instead of the scattered, panicked way I'd been throwing money at whichever bill felt loudest that particular month. I cut expenses I didn't even realize I could cut. I renegotiated one of my loan's interest rates simply by calling and asking something that had never once occurred to me was even possible. I picked up freelance marketing work on weekends, using the exact skills Renata had spent 4 years telling me weren't good enough, and discovered, almost immediately, that actual clients in the open market were willing to pay me nearly double what Bramwell paid me for the same quality of work. That last part hit me harder than almost anything else in this entire story. For 4 years, I had let one woman's voice convince me my work was mediocre. It took strangers on the internet, paying me real money for that same work, to show me she had been lying to me the entire time, not necessarily maliciously, but effectively, in a way that had genuinely reshaped how small I saw myself. Around month 4 of working with Marisol, something happened at Bramwell that I think, looking back, was the final piece I needed. Renata called me into her office on a Friday afternoon, always Fridays. I noticed, when there'd be an entire weekend for her words to sit and fester before I could do anything about them, and told me, in that same cold, precise voice, that my performance had been inconsistent, and that I should consider whether this is really the right fit long-term. For 4 years, a version of me would have gone home and spiraled over that sentence for days. Instead, something different happened. I sat there, looked her directly in the eye, and felt something shift. "Can I ask you something, Renata?" I said. "In 4 years here, I've never once received written feedback that wasn't in a closed-door meeting with no other witnesses. I've asked for a raise every single year and been told not right now. I've taken on responsibilities well beyond my job description without additional pay. Can you help me understand what, specifically, inconsistent means?" I watched her face shift surprise, then something colder. She hadn't expected pushback. In 4 years, I had never given her any. "I don't think I need to justify management decisions to you," she said finally. That's fair, I said, standing up. But I think I need to start looking at whether this job is actually the right fit for me too. I walked out of her office that day with my hands shaking, but for a completely different reason than they usually shook after meetings with her. Not from fear this time. From something closer to power, the small, quiet power of finally saying a true thing out loud, after years of silently absorbing lies about my own worth. The leap. 2 weeks after that conversation, I did something I never, in 4 years at Bramwell, thought I'd actually have the courage to do. I gave my notice. I hadn't lined up another full-time job yet, and I want to be clear, this wasn't a reckless decision made in a moment of anger. By that point, my freelance marketing clients had grown steadily enough, month over month, that I had real, tangible proof I could replace my Bramwell income, and likely exceed it, working entirely for myself. Marisol had helped me build a simple financial runway plan, enough savings, even modest, to cover 3 months of expenses while I transitioned fully into freelance work. It wasn't reckless. It was, for the first time in years, a decision built on actual information instead of fear. Renata's reaction, when I handed her my resignation letter, was almost anticlimactic. A tight, thin-lipped, "well, good luck with that," delivered in a tone clearly meant to suggest she expected me to fail spectacularly and come crawling back within months. I didn't come crawling back. The first month on my own was genuinely terrifying, in a different way than the terror I'd felt sitting on that bathroom floor months earlier. This was the terror of choice, of knowing that every single client relationship, every project, every dollar earned, was now entirely dependent on my own effort, with no safety net of a guaranteed paycheck underneath me. But something else was happening simultaneously that I hadn't fully expected. Without Renata's voice in my ear every single day, telling me I was lucky, telling me my work was adequate at best, I started doing genuinely better work. Not because I'd suddenly become more talented overnight, I'd always had the skill. I simply, for the first time in 4 years, had the mental and emotional space to actually use it well. By month 3 of freelancing full-time, I had replaced my old Bramwell salary completely. By month 6, I had exceeded it by nearly 40%. I remember the exact night I made my final credit card payment, the one that had been quietly growing heavier for years, the one that used to make my stomach drop every time I checked my banking app. I sat at my kitchen table, hit submit on that final payment, and just sat there for a long moment, staring at a balance that finally, for the first time in as long as I could remember, read $0. I cried, not from sadness, from something closer to relief so deep it had nowhere else to go except straight through my eyes. Finding Marisol again. About a year after that very first wrong number text, I decided to do something I'd been thinking about for months. I reached out to Marisol not for a coaching call this time, but simply to tell her what her small, accidental mistake had turned into. I told her everything: the bathroom floor, the $43, the 11 days until rent, Renata, and the 4 years of being quietly convinced I was lucky to be treated poorly, the debt, and the 4-year avalanche plan that had, by that point, become a completely paid-off balance, the freelance business that now fully supported me, doing work I was actually proud of, for clients who valued me the way Bramwell never had. There was a long pause on the phone after I finished. "Hannah," she said finally, her voice thick with something I hadn't expected: genuine emotion. "I want you to understand something. I text wrong numbers by accident more often than you'd think. Most people just say wrong number and that's the end of it, and that's completely fine, that's normal. But you're the only person, in years of doing this, who actually said yes to that follow-up message. That yes was entirely yours. I just happened to be standing nearby when you decided to take it." I've thought about that distinction many times since. It would be a nicer, tidier story if I told you a stranger's text alone rescued me from years of debt and a toxic job. But that's not quite true, and I don't think it's fair to Marisol, or to myself, to tell it that way. The text was an accident. Saying yes to what came after it was a choice. I think about all the other moments across those 4 years at Bramwell where I could have made a different choice, could have pushed back sooner, could have asked for help sooner, could have believed in my own work sooner. I didn't, for a long time, because fear and exhaustion had convinced me that staying quiet and small was safer than the risk of asking for more. What that wrong number text actually gave me wasn't a magic solution. It gave me one small, unexpected door, at the exact moment I finally had just enough desperation and just enough curiosity left to walk through it. The life I built on the other side. Today, almost 3 years after that night on my bathroom floor, my life looks almost entirely unrecognizable compared to where it started. My freelance marketing business now supports me comfortably. With a small wait list of new clients, I have the freedom to say yes or no to, rather than desperately accepting anything that comes my way out of financial panic. I am completely debt-free, a sentence I genuinely didn't believe I'd ever get to say about myself, sitting in that bathroom with $43 and 11 days until rent. I've built an actual emergency fund, something I'd never once had in my adult life before this. I sleep better. I check my banking app now out of simple curiosity, rather than the tight, anxious dread that used to accompany every single glance at that number. And Renata, I heard, through a former coworker I stayed loosely in touch with, that Bramwell eventually let her go about a year after I left, following what he described only as a pattern of complaints from her team that finally reached the right ears. I won't pretend I felt nothing when I heard that news. I felt something. But mostly, honestly, I just felt grateful I was no longer standing anywhere near enough to be affected by it either way. I think about that version of myself, often the woman sitting alone on cold bathroom tile, convinced her life had permanently shrunk down to the size of her smallest, most exhausted moments. I wish I could go back and tell her a few things. I would tell her that being underpaid for years doesn't mean she's worth less. It means she was in a system that profited from her not knowing her own worth. I would tell her that $61,000 in debt feels, in the moment, like a permanent life sentence. It isn't. It's a number, and numbers can be reduced, one clear, informed decision at a time. And I would tell her gently, because I know exactly how tired she was, that sometimes the door out of a life that's gotten too small doesn't arrive dressed as anything dramatic. Sometimes it arrives as a stranger's simple mistake, a text meant for someone named Diane, landing in her phone at exactly the moment she finally had just enough courage left to say yes to something new. The lesson, what rock bottom actually taught me. I want to close this story with the thing I believe most deeply, after everything I went through over these past 3 years. Rock bottom, when you're actually living inside it, doesn't feel like a turning point. It feels permanent. It feels like proof that you've failed at something, that your life has simply become this small, and it's staying this small forever. It isn't true. It never was. What I learned, sitting on that bathroom floor and in every difficult month that followed, is that most of us aren't actually stuck because we're incapable. We're stuck because we're exhausted, underinformed, and quietly convinced, often by people or systems who benefit from us believing it, that we deserve less than we actually do. A wrong number text didn't save my life. It simply handed me a small, unexpected door at the exact moment I finally had enough left in me to walk through it. If you're listening to this tonight, sitting in your own version of that bathroom floor, buried under debt that feels permanent, working for someone who has convinced you that you're lucky to be treated poorly, exhausted in a way that makes hope feel like a luxury you can't afford, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not failing. You may simply be caught in a system that was never built to make this easy for you. And somewhere close by, there may already be a door you haven't noticed yet. It might not look dramatic. It might not even look intentional. But if you have just enough courage left to say yes when it appears, it might be exactly enough to change everything. If this story moved you tonight, I want you to know something. Wherever you are in your own financial struggle, your own toxic job, your own quiet feeling that your life has become smaller than it should be, none of that is the end of your story. It's just the hardest chapter of it. Ask for the raise. Make the call. Say yes to the 20 free minutes. You never know which small, unexpected door is the one that changes everything. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like this video, drop a comment and let me know your thoughts, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Calm Girl Stories for more real, emotional stories about struggle, strength, and the quiet, powerful process of rebuilding a life from rock bottom. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next story.